This is a concept I learned that has absolutely transformed my life and the way that I interact with life and the people around me, and it's called the redemptive gifts. You may have heard of the term the redemptive gifts before, but I doubt you've heard of them in the way that I'm going to describe them today. Now, Romans 12 talks about the 7 redemptive gifts, and it discusses them very briefly, not much detail. But essentially, there are 7 different types of people. You have number 1, the prophet. Number 2, the servant. Number 3, the teacher. Number 4, the exhorter. Number 5, the giver. Don't worry about memorizing these now. I'm going to go through each one later. Number 6, the ruler. And number 7, the mercy. Now, each type has their own superpower. Each type has their own strength. Each type also has their own weakness that they are more prone to than the others. And I'm going to go through each one today, and I want you to ask yourself, okay, which one am I? Do I know anyone? Maybe that's too on the nose for me to ask you to do that. You can do whatever you want. You know what? You don't have to do anything I say. So the first one is the prophet. Now, the prophet, these are the people who speak their mind. They are very direct. They are often very intense. One of the most things they value more than anything else is bringing people to justice. The prophet, while not being afraid of people, was one of their skills, and actually a lot of us admire prophets for being able to speak their mind and not having fear of man. Even though this is one of their characteristics, one of the side effects is they often don't have that many friends. They're often not known for their relational skills. Now, a prophet can have no friends and still be very popular. Let's look at some examples of prophets in the Bible. One of the most famous Bible prophets was Elijah. Now, you might be thinking, oh yeah, he was a prophet of God. Now, that's true. This prophet of God was also the type prophet, according to the redemptive gifts. You can think of redemptive gifts as the most ancient personality type indicator. And if that phrase turns you away, I apologize. Now, a lot of times when I'm talking to a prophet in modern day times, someone who was born with this redemptive gift, and I'm telling them about these gifts, or even when I'm in a group setting and I'm preaching about these gifts, it's very normal for someone in the group to say, I don't really like personality type indicators. I think they do a horrible job at telling us who we are as people. That is often the prophet in the group who will speak their mind and tell me to my face in front of everyone that they think this is not a great thing to talk about. And so that is the prophet type. Now, Elijah in the Bible, he was a prophet. He would go to people and he would tell them exactly the peace of mind that God wanted to give them. Now, other prophets like Isaiah, even though he was a prophet of God, he wasn't the redemptive gift of prophet. In fact, Isaiah preferred to stay in his room and write. He wrote everything. He didn't like going to people and talking to their faces like Elijah did. Elijah liked to go and spit in their face and be like, hey, such says the Lord, blah, 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 blah. And so prophets can be very intense. Now, some modern day examples of prophets who you may have heard of is Donald Trump. Donald Trump is redemptive gift of prophet. He speaks his mind very bluntly, and he's not afraid of what other people think of him. He's not necessarily someone who would be considered to be good at relationships, not a people person, but he's also very popular because of his polarizing beliefs. And this is quite common we see in a lot of famous prophets, is they're famous because they really lean into their gift, their ability to speak their mind without any hindrance and to pursue justice. Another example of a modern day prophet, I'm not talking about prophet of God, I'm talking about redemptive gift prophet, the personality type prophet, is Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate blew up a little bit ago. He's also someone who unapologetically speaks his mind, not a people guy, but became popular because people looked at him and go, wow, I wish I could be as bold and as brave as him. And for prophets, this isn't really a developed skill. It's something that they're born with. One of the struggles of the prophet, redemptive gift, is forgiveness. When they see someone doing something wrong, they are ready to tear the world apart to make that person pay. They're ready to do anything it takes, to get that person to bend on their knee and repent. They don't really have any interest in forgiving someone who hasn't repented. Now, before I continue any further, I want to explain where the data for these points are coming from, and that is the fractals of 7. Now, what is a fractal of 7? Well, I just mentioned that there are 7 redemptive gifts in the Bible, 7 gift types. And throughout the Bible, we see the number 7 appear multiple times. We see the number 7 appear in the days of creation. We see the number 7 appear in the items in the tabernacle, in the churches that John wrote to, in Revelation. There's many 7s all throughout the Bible. And when we see the number 7 in the Bible, it is often a list of things that we can actually correlate to one by one in order of all 7 of the redemptive gifts. What do I mean by that? Well, let's look at the days of creation. Each of the 7 days of creation, 1 through 7, correspond to each of the redemptive gifts, 1 through 7. So, day 1 of creation is the prophet. Same with the churches in Revelation. The first church is a letter for the prophet. Also, same goes for the 7 last sentences that Jesus said on the cross. In fact, out of the 7 last sentences that Jesus said on the cross, each sentence is the hardest thing for that redemptive gift to do. The first sentence Jesus said on the cross, which is the sentence for the prophet, is, "Forgive them, Lord, for they do not know what they are doing." And once the prophet can understand what it means and what it is to forgive people who don't deserve forgiveness, that is when the prophet can truly shine and glow and light up in their gifting. Now, there's other things about the prophet, but we're already 6 minutes into this video, and I only plan to be talking for 20. This might have to be 2 parts. So the next gift is the servant. Now, the servant redemptive gift. Oh, also, before I continue, there are different countries. Each country has its own redemptive gift. And so some prophet countries, I mentioned some celebrities, I mentioned the Bible character, celebrities, and I also want to mention the countries for the gifts as well. Countries that are the prophet gift include Germany, very direct in your face, like this is the way it is, you don't beat around the bush. United States of America, it's another one. USA is a prophet nation, very, they'll tell you. If you have a bad hairstyle, why withhold it? When you can just tell the person and let them know, hey, your hair looks ugly. You owe it to them to know. That's how the prophet thinks, not how I think. Oh my gosh, I would never want to tell a person their hair looks bad. Speaking of which, no comments on my hair. The second redemptive gift is the servant. Now, characteristics of the servant redemptive gift is they love to serve and they get energy and value and meaning from being helpful to others. Love to serve, passionate about serving, and they don't easily grow tired serving. Now, you hear me well, everyone loves a servant. If you go to a church and you're a prophet, it's very normal that people would avoid you and not want to be near you because of all the honesty you have to give. But if you're a servant, everyone wants you at their church because you just, humbly will get stuff done. Now, the servant also doesn't like the spotlight. They hate being in the spotlight. They prefer to be behind the scenes, in the shadows. All of us have a level of stage fright. The servant especially, they don't want to be put in the front. They want to be helping from behind. And some examples in the Bible of redemptive gift of servant is King Saul. Now, when King Saul was first anointed as king by Samuel, he was so timid and shy that after he was told he's going to be king of Israel, he went right back to farming at his father's farm. He had no interest in becoming king of Israel. He didn't want to be seen. He didn't want to be in the spotlight, but he was pushed into that position by God. Another servant in the Bible is Queen Esther. Queen Esther, she was a redemptive gift of servant, and she also, if you remember the story, didn't want to be in the spotlight. She didn't want to be the queen over the whole empire with King Xerxes. But God actually has a special place in his heart for the servant because out of all the gifts, the servant's a special, unique, I guess you could say ability, I don't know if you call it that, but gifting that God's given the servant is to rule with authority. God can entrust the servant with authority more than any of the other gifts. And the reason why is because the servant is the only gift that does not seek authority. They have a level of humility greater than the other gifts. Naturally, that is part of their DNA that says, I don't want authority. And therefore, God can entrust them with more authority than any of the other gifts because he knows that they are a lot less likely to abuse it. So the servant's ability, gifting, is authority. And the prophet's one is speaking the things that are not into being. The prophet has an incredible ability for ideas and for revelation and speaking into life, the things that don't exist yet. And so, servant is authority. And it's kind of funny because, I don't know any servant who is thrilled to hear that. They're all like, oh, authority? Like, really? I don't really want that. And that's why God can trust them. A character that I can think of in our modern world or in history that was a servant was Mother Teresa. She served with all her heart, and she didn't really care for being in the spotlight. Now, this is an extreme example, but in my life, I have quite a few friends who are servant as well. It's not an uncommon one. It's just very uncommon to see a celebrity or a popular person who is a servant. Now, country servant would be India. They are a servant nation, and we'll also get into how the different redemptive gifts interact with each other. For example, one of the gifts is called ruler, we're going to talk about later. And if you combine a ruler and put it with a servant gifting, it could be either, really productive or really abusive, depending on how the relationship goes. But we'll probably talk more about that when we get to the ruler gift. Now, the third one, and I'm probably going to have to film a part 2 because we're already almost 12 minutes in. The third redemptive gift. Oh, and I just want to mention one more thing about the servant before we go on. I know it's taking long, but I think you're going to find value in what I'm about to say. I want to reiterate that every 7 in the Bible is a mirror of the redemptive gifts. And for the days of creation, on the second day, God created the atmosphere, the air. And the air is something, the oxygen, the carbon dioxide, all this stuff, these are things that we breathe every day that we can't see, but it is vitally important to sustaining life. And that is one of the characteristics of the servant, is that although they are rarely seen and noticed, the servant will serve and is vitally important for the lives of humanity. They play a really important role in keeping things going and keeping everyone alive and supporting us in ways that we don't ever really see, just like the air. But they are there, just like the air. Now, the third redemptive gift is the teacher. Now, one of my favorite ways of identifying a teacher is that every time I've ever shared this principle of the redemptive gifts to a group, and there's a teacher in the group, they will always immediately reach for their Bibles and look up the verses and clarify to see if everything I'm saying is correct. One of the most important things for the teacher is truth. The teachers, pretty much above anything else, they care about truth, preserving truth, knowing truth, understanding truth. Now, even though they're called a teacher, teachers aren't born with the gift of teaching. They aren't born with the ability to be great teachers. However, they're capable of developing themselves to become great teachers. It's within their genetic potential. Also, teachers are really good students. If you have a redemptive gift teacher, you can also find them loving to study, loving to learn, loving to research, loving to go to school, loving to go to university. And this is one of the strengths of the teacher, is learning. And it can also be one of the things that stunts their growth, because the teacher is sometimes at risk of being so interested in studying and learning that they actually decide not to implement, not to do, not to execute, because they're a lot more comfortable in the knowing and in the learning phase of things. Teachers, their highest calling is to rule in the government of God and to know who Jesus is, because Jesus is the truth. And as I mentioned earlier, truth is important to teachers, and to the degree that a teacher can know Jesus is to the degree with which they can rule and reign with Christ on the earth, which is their highest calling. Now, some teachers in life who you might know. Let's start with Bible characters. Thomas in the Bible was a teacher, Jesus' disciple Thomas. It was probably made pretty famous when Jesus got crucified and rose from the dead, and Thomas was like, I won't believe it unless I see it. And this is usually the teacher mentality. Teachers are naturally skeptical, and that's good. We need people who are skeptical because someone like me will just believe anything they hear. So teachers are the people who verify, and they also make really good debaters. So Thomas in the Bible was a teacher. Another teacher in the Bible was Samuel, prophet Samuel, the one who was, lying in bed one night and he heard a voice and he had to verify, what was this voice? Who's speaking to me? And so he went to Eli, and eventually Eli told him, hey, Samuel, that's God. And Samuel became one of the great prophets of Israel and the last judge. So he is a teacher. Teachers are a lot of fun to be around. Also, the priesthood. They were a teacher group. And so, like I said earlier, there's redemptive gift for the nations. Every social group has a DNA as well. It's one of the redemptive gifts. So the priesthood, they were teachers. And the reason why God chose teachers to be the priests is because teachers don't condemn people. Unlike the prophet, the prophet, they are really happy to condemn people, but teachers are some of the most approachable individuals. They're willing to listen, to hear what's going on, to accept you no matter what. And that's one of the reasons why God chose the priesthood in the Old Testament to be redemptive gift teacher. It's very common as well to see redemptive gift teachers who choose to go into pastoring. They're also in a lot of universities. Now, a nation, do I remember a nation that is redemptive gift teacher? Singapore is redemptive gift of teacher. Very much in the mind, very much in a, can we prove it? Is it measurable? In all those types of, academic stuff. So Singapore is an example of a teacher nation. Is there anything that Yeah. There's a lot of sevens that I could go into. I could film a 20-minute video just going into each of these topics one by one. But we will move on to number 4 with the remainder of our time. So number 4, the fourth redemptive gift is exhorter. And exhorters are the extreme socialites who they will just walk into a room and, fluff their jacket and everyone goes, ah! They just fall in love with them at first sight. And it's not a visual thing. It's not because the exhorter is so visually attractive, but it's because something about their spirit is drawing people's souls in a very impactful way that makes us stop and notice. So exhorters are, by nature, they're very social creatures. And even if they claim, oh, I'm an introvert, they still will attract flocks of people who just love them. And everyone thinks that that exhorter is their best friend. And the exhorter makes them feel so kind or so happy and welcomed and warm and fuzzy on the inside. And an example of an exhorter in the Bible is Jeremiah. Jeremiah, he wasn't planning on being a prophet, but when God did make him a prophet, he was very social about it. As I mentioned earlier, Isaiah spent his time inside the room writing, but not Jeremiah. Jeremiah was at the palace, then over at the synagogue, then here, then over in the town square, then over there, and he was all over the place. He was a really social guy. He didn't want to be cooped up inside. He wanted to be out hanging out with everybody else. So this is the exhorter. Now, I was going through the 7 things that Jesus said on the cross for the prophet. I mentioned it, and I do want to just mention the servant and the teacher, and the hardest thing for the servant, the hardest thing for the teacher, and the hardest thing for the exhorter to do before we end this video. So starting with the servant, the second thing Jesus said on the cross, he looked over to the guy dying next to him and said, today you'll be with me in paradise. And that dying criminal saw himself as a dying criminal. But that's not what Jesus saw. When Jesus looked at the dying criminal, he saw a son of God who was going to rejoice with him in paradise, hang out with him in heaven. And one of the hardest things for the servant is to see themselves the way God sees them. It's very easy for the servant to look down upon themselves, but God actually sees you as someone he can't wait to spend eternity with. And so for the servant, the hardest thing for them is to know their value. The third thing Jesus said on the cross is he looked at John and Mary, who gave birth to him, Jesus, And he said to John, behold your mom. And he said to Mary, behold your son. And what Jesus was doing is he was giving John the responsibility of taking care of his mom. And one of the hardest things for the teacher to do is to give responsibility to other people. Because if the teacher has learned how to do something well, then why ask someone else to do it in case they might mess up when the teacher can do it and do a perfect job? This is not the right mindset to have. And so one of the hardest things for the teacher to do is to give people who aren't ready yet the responsibility that they need to receive in order for them to grow. So teacher, giving people responsibility, if you can do that, you're on your way. And fourthly, for the exhorter. The fourth thing Jesus said on the cross is, my God, why have you forsaken me? And one of the hardest things for the exhorter is to be completely forsaken by people. And imagine, even worse, to be forsaken by people, to be forsaken by God. And the reality is, God is zealous. He is jealous over the exhorter's tongue. The exhorter is capable of speaking to rouse up an army. An example of an exhorter in history is Napoleon Bonaparte. If you read his story, you know he could get a whole group of people all ready to fight, against their own leaders real quickly. An exhorter nation is France. Another exhorter nation is Brazil. And so Napoleon, just an incredible speaker. And God jealously desires the exhorter's tongue. And one of the exhorter's weaknesses is speaking about things that don't really matter in eternity. Exhorters are incredible talkers, but God's desire is that the exhorter talks about the things that really matter, the things in his word, and the things that will last for all eternity. And therefore, there are times when the exhorter is running away from God, not doing what God wants, that the Lord has to withhold socialness. He has to withhold relationship and connection from the exhorter's life in order for the exhorter to come back to the place that they were originally created to be, and that is to use their gifts, to use their social, to use their tongue for the glory of God. So I'm going to pause here, and in the next one, perhaps tomorrow, we'll have time to come and we'll talk about the last three gifts, which are going to be discussed then. So until then, God bless you, and I'll see you later.